Hello and welcome to part 3 of Blender 2.6, the basics. And in this video, we're going to make a snowman. So to make a snowman, we have to obviously add new objects to our scene. We're going to be making a snowman out of primitive shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and click my splash screen to get rid of it. And to start off, it's a really good idea when you're a beginner to always add and move objects from orthographic views, your front view, your left view, or your right view, and your top view. So I'm going to go ahead and press 5 on my numpad to go to orthographic, and if you were watching my last video, you would have set up Blender so that you can also use your number row to change your views with the keyboard shortcuts as well. So you could press 5 on your number row. I'm going to press 1 to go to my front view, so now I'm looking at my scene from front ortho. Now my snowman, which I'm going to be making out of basically spheres and cylinders and cones, does not need any cube. So I'm going to go ahead and select my cube, which it already is. And to delete an object, I'm going to press either delete on my keyboard or backspace, or the X key will work as well. So I'll press X, and then I'll press delete. And so when you're adding objects, there's one new thing that I haven't mentioned yet that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in Blender. And that is this kind of crosshair looking thing in the middle of my screen. If I left click anywhere in my 3D viewport, that crosshair is actually called a 3D cursor. It gets positioned wherever I click. Now, because we're working in a 3D world, this 3D cursor can be anywhere in 3D space, and it points to a certain coordinate. So if I look at my scene from, let's say, some random angle and click, it's going to be in that random position. Be really careful, because if I zoom out and click somewhere over here, yes, my 3D cursor is way off in the way off into space. If I press Shift C, the 3D cursor goes back to the middle. So what is the 3D cursor for? The 3D cursor is a coordinate that you can use, and wherever it is where new objects will get put whenever you add them to your scene. Before we get there though, I'm actually going to go ahead and go to File and User Preferences, and under Add-ons, I'm going to turn on screencast keys so that you can, and I'll save those settings, so that you can see what keys I'm pressing. And I'm going to turn them on over here. And let's go ahead and make them a little bit bigger. Let's go to maybe size 48, and let's say 100, so that you can see exactly what I'm pressing. And then I'll press the N key to hide that. So now you can see what I'm pressing over here. So if I click somewhere and I want to put my 3D cursor back in the middle of the screen, I can press Shift C, and it'll kind of snap back to the middle. And let's go up to, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to press 1 to go back to my front view, and then pan over. Let's go up to the Add menu. Now, all objects that you're going to be adding, at least as a beginner, are going to be called meshes. Meshes are basically solid objects in Blender. We'll talk a little bit about more about those in a future video. But I'm going to go ahead and add a UV sphere. That's a normal sphere, so I'm going to go ahead and add it. And it pops up exactly centered on where my 3D cursor is. Now, as soon as you add any mesh to your scene, you always get options at the bottom left of your 3D viewport on the bottom of the tool shelf. There's a new section down here that only shows up as soon as you add a new mesh, and it's called the Add and then whatever you added. In this case, I added a UV sphere, so here it is. And this is where you can change the number of polygons and the number of kind of faces on the newly created object. One of kind of the downsides of Blender is that you can only change these things immediately after you add the object. So if I move the object, that section goes away. So I'm going to go ahead and press X to delete this object, and I'll go up to Add, or actually I can press Shift A, and this brings up the Add menu as well. Again, I love keyboard shortcuts, so Add or Shift A. And let's go ahead and add that UV sphere. Right off the bat, I can change the number of segments, so I can kind of drag that down, and it'll make a much simpler sphere. Of course, the fewer polygons, the worse it'll look. The more polygons, if you really crank that up, you might actually crash your computer, depending on how powerful your computer is. What else is there? Size. If I want to make my UV sphere big or small right off the bat, I can. But you can always use the scale keyboard shortcut or the gizmo to scale it. So I'm going to leave that at 1. And you can always type in these things as well. I'm going to make my my UV sphere, let's say 36 by 32. Looks pretty good to me. Maybe a few less rings. I should have made them approximately square. Looks good to me. And let's put my that ball of a snowman on kind of the ground, which is right the red line looking at the scene from the front. Okay, to duplicate an object, there's another keyboard shortcut. Of course, there's a button over here on your tool shelf to duplicate an object, but I'm going to go ahead and press Shift-D with my UV sphere selected, and I'm going to put my mouse somewhere in the 3D viewport while I do that, so Shift-D, and now a duplicate of that mesh becomes stuck to my mouse. So I'm going to put this sphere up here, and click to let it go, and then I'll press S to scale this one down to make it a little bit smaller. And with my mouse cursor not right in the middle of it, and not right at the edge of the, or not outside of the window, but somewhere in the middle, just so that's easier to control. If I put my mouse right here and try to scale it down, it makes it very difficult, because the way you scale is you move your mouse cursor closer to the middle of the object or farther away, so don't put your mouse cursor right over the middle of the object before you scale. Okay, let's go Shift-D to duplicate, and move it up and click, and I'll press S to scale, and make it a little bit smaller, and move it down a little bit with the gizmo. Great. Notice how I did all of that from the front orthographic view. It's really important. Otherwise, if I went to my right view, some of them might be, off. If you ever try adding objects from like a perspective view or any kind of a user view, so any view other than front, right, or top, you might get things that aren't quite lined up properly. So always use 1, 3, and 7 and stick to orthographic view, which is of course the 5 key. Let's go ahead and add some eyeballs. So I'm going to put my 3D cursor right around here by left clicking, of course, and I'll go Shift-A to add a new UV sphere. I'm going to make this one a little bit lower res, so I'm going to go maybe 16 by 12. Sure. And maybe I'll scale it down right off the bat using this tool over here. Okay, there is my eyeball, and let's go ahead and press G to grab, and I'm going to put it on the head. But you'll notice that when I put it on the head, it actually goes inside the head, and that's because it's actually lined up with the head and the middle ball and the bottom body ball. So I need to go either to my side view or my top view, and I need to move it forward. Now, forward from the top view is actually down, so this is the front of the head, this is the back of his head. If you look from the right view, this is the front of his head, this is the back of his head. So I'm going to put it right about there. I might use my G key to move it up a little bit as well. And let's go back to our front view, and then I'll move it over using the gizmo. And there we go. Maybe I'll move it back a little bit too. Okay, for my front view, I now have one eyeball, and maybe actually I'll move it forward a little bit and scale it up slightly. So I'm going to go back to my front view, and I'll duplicate the eyeball, so Shift-D, and move it over here. Great. Let's go ahead and add some buttons. For buttons, I'm actually going to add icospheres. So I'm going to go to Shift-A and add an icosphere. Remember that everything under Shift-A that you're adding right now is a mesh. An icosphere is a little bit different. It's not made up of squares. It's made up of triangles, so it's a little bit more like a soccer ball, kind of. Let's go ahead and go to the side view, and then scale that icosphere down to be like a button size approximately, and let's put it right about there. Remember that when you're positioning 3D objects, you always have to look to see where it is from two different views. So it looks right from this right view, but from the front view I can see that it's not anywhere near the middle of his chest stomach area. So there's one. Shift-D to duplicate, click, Shift-D to duplicate, and I don't have to hold anything down when I have something grabbed. Maybe I'll go ahead and add a few more to make it. Whoops. Oh, so I hit I think I hit Shift-F by accident. Be careful, because Blender is very keyboard shortcut oriented. If you ever press something weird, like you press the P key and it looks like that, you can always press Escape generally to get out of some weird mode that you don't know how you got there from. So Shift-D and move that button there. Let's go ahead and add a cone for a nose. So I'm going to go put my 3D cursor beside his head, go up to Add Mesh and Cone. Now this is where it gets a little bit trickier, because of course I can scale it down, right? But I want to make the cone a little bit longer, so I want to make it kind of long, narrow cone. The easiest way to do this is to get it the right diameter or the right width first, and then just make it longer. If you try to use your scale gizmo and then make it narrower like that, and then make it narrower like that, you're not going to get it exactly even, most likely. So what I do is I press S to scale, and I get it the right width first, and then I drag it, or drag the scale gizmo handle on the Z-axis up to get the right length. That's probably the easiest way. Let's go ahead and press 3 to go to our side view. Maybe I'll scale that whole thing up with the S key first. I like sticking with my move gizmo and not staying on the rotator scale gizmo. Let's press R, and now we can rotate from the side view. And of course it rotates never towards or away from your view. It always rotates perpendicular to your view, so side to side. Let's go put it right there. By the way, I'm going to press escape. If you're ever in the middle of rotating or scaling and you press escape, it'll always go back to the way it was. If you press R, or this is really true with any R, G, and S, rotate, grab, scale. If you press the keyboard shortcut for one of those, and then you type a number, it'll move or rotate your object by that number of units or by that number of degrees. So I'm going to press R and then the negative sign and 90 for 90, and then it rotates negative 90 degrees, in other words 90 degrees to the left. And so I can press enter. I'm going to press undo, so I'll show you that again. If I press R 90 and press enter, it rotates the other way around. So again, R negative 90, enter. And now I can press G to grab and put it right about there. Go back to my front view, put it right about there. I might actually scale it, make it a little bit wider, and then use my gizmo to shrink it down. Ooh, that's probably even too thick. Let's go scale it down that way, make it a little bit longer. I forgot to take into consideration that some of it was in the head of the snowman as well. Okay, there is my carrot nose. Let's go back to the front view. I'm going to add some more icospheres to make the mouth, little pieces of coal for the mouth. Icosphere, let's scale this down. Again, if you add, I'm going to delete that. If you add a new mesh, like an icosphere, you can always change the number of subdivisions up or down, or change the number of faces. This one's a little bit weird. I'm not sure what 2 means for subdivisions. Maybe I'll just leave it at that. Never go too high because it'll crash your computer quite likely. That looks pretty good to me. Let's put it, oh, it's in the middle of the head, so of course we need to bring it forward to the front of the head. Now this is a little bit tricky because the head is curved, so when I duplicate, let's zoom in a little bit. When I duplicate the mouthpieces, I'm going to have to push that one. Whoops. Again, I pressed Shift F by accident. I'm not quite used to my keyboard yet, I guess. I'm going to push these 2 back. By the way, if you have one object selected and you want to select another one as well, you can hold Shift, and then that will let you select a second object. I'm going to go to my side view, and we're going to move these 2 at the same time backward a little bit. Looks good to me. Let's select one of these. Shift D to duplicate. Move that one up. Shift D. And we'll put that one right there. Move it down a little bit, and then we'll select those both of them, and we'll move them both back into the head a little bit more. Let's go ahead and make a top hat. So a top hat is really made out of 2 cylinders. One for the big tall part, and a really skinny flat one, like a squashed cylinder for a brim of the top hat. So let's go ahead and put our 3D cursor somewhere up here, and we'll go Shift A to add, and we'll add a cylinder. Cylinder is that size by default, and of course I can change the number of sides or vertices that it has, but I want to keep it relatively high. We'll talk about at the end of this video how to smooth that out. Let's just go to the default, which I think was 32. Let's make it the right width first, so I'll press scale, not caring how high or tall it is. That looks about right, and now I can use my scale gizmo on the Z-axis to make it taller or shorter. And now I can use the G key to grab it and put it in the right spot. The brim is also a cylinder that goes flat across, but it's squished. So I'm going to duplicate this cylinder and move it over here just for now. I'm going to make it the right width. So I might view my scene from the top and then make it about the right width, so bigger obviously than the top part of the hat, and then I got to squash it down. And it might take you a few tries to squash it down using the scale gizmo. That's totally okay. And let's press G to grab it and put it in the right spot. You might check it from the top view as well to make sure that, well, it's kind of hard to see because they're both kind of, I can't see the tall one. So I might press Z on my keyboard, and Z toggles between looking at my scene from wireframe view or solid view. That's going to make it a little bit easier for me to see how things line up, kind of. Let's select both of them with the Shift key, and then go to 7. Yeah, that one's a little bit not quite centered perfectly. I'm not going to get it exact. I could, if I was really picky, press N and then look at the coordinates, and if I set both the X and the Y coordinates exactly the same for both this cylinder and this cylinder, I could line them up the same, and that would be nice, but I'm not going to get that picky. Let's go ahead and press Z to go back to solid view, and let's add some arms. So I'm going to put up my 3D cursor right there. Shift A to add. Let's add a new cylinder. Again, I'm going to make it the right width first, and he's going to have really skinny arms that will be long eventually. So I'm going to make them really skinny arms first. Remember that the circles on the cylinder are on the top and the bottom. So that's about the right width. And now I'm going to use my scale gizmo. Actually, what I'll do this time, instead of, I could just drag it up a bunch of times, but what I'll do is I'll press S to scale. And now if I press Z, it will only scale on the Z axis. Now it's important that I don't rotate the arm first, because then it will stretch and make it kind of an oval stretched diagonal cylinder. But so don't rotate your arm before you do this. S and then Z. That looks about the right length. And I'll duplicate that with Shift D, and then I'll press S and Z again and make it smaller. And that's a finger. Let's go ahead and grab that and put it up here. And let's make a duplicate of that, Shift D, and then R, and then I'll grab it and make a duplicate and rotate with the R key and grab. And we want to select all of these things. We could, and move them over and rotate them all at the same time. We could just hold Shift and right click and right click and right click, and that would be great. Another way of selecting multiple things is the box select. And to do a box select, you can press the B key on your keyboard, and you're going to see kind of lines going all the way across the screen, all the way up and down, following your mouse. And that lets you do like a marquee or a box select and click and drag around objects. Be careful that you don't select other things as well. So I've got my arm selected. Let's do a rotate. And it kind of rotates around the median center of all of your objects. So it's rotating right there, because there's 3 objects that have their kind of median point, their rotate point right up here, and this one is down here. And because there's 3, there's a higher weighting towards the rotate point of the whole thing being closer to those fingers than the rotation point of the arm cylinder. If that makes any sense, that's great. I'm going to move it right there. Let's press Shift D to duplicate everything that's selected, and I'll just move the mouse over here and click and rotate, and I'll grab it and put it right about there. That snowman looks pretty good to me. If you want to add more things to your snowman, that's great. But in the next video, we're going to show you how to save and make backups and do iterated saves. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.